Please welcome back after the tea break. We are going to focus on two areas. So we have two areas that we are going to focus on as part of our themes today. One, we are going to look at electoral reforms, and we'll also look at political party processes. We have consulted and we have agreed, wisdom has prevailed, that we can look at all these together because they link and tie together. That means that we will have all the key presenters for these two areas coming up now, and we'll also have the discussants coming up together so that we do this together and have discussions together and the plenary together before we break for lunch. Now, before we break for lunch, we've also discussed and saw it fit, because the Right Reverend Kivuva is here and he had prepared something briefly to share. We wouldn't like him to go back with it. So just at the point when we finish with the two focus areas, just before lunch, we'll ask Right Reverend Kivuva to also come to the podium, share with us a few things, a few perspectives, and a few notes in guidance, and bless the lunch for us as we break for lunch. So that is the plan that we have from now moving on to lunchtime. Is that acceptable? Very well. So allow me to call Bwana Franklin Mukwanja, ED, CMD Kenya, who will be speaking alongside Dr. Karatu Kiemo, who is a lecturer at the University of Nairobi. But allow Bwana Mukwanja, who will take the mic to introduce Dr. Karatu, because the topic area that Dr. Karatu will be speaking to is a study that was commissioned under the guidance and auspices of CMD Kenya, through the leadership of Bwana Franklin Mukwanja. So that is the interlinked, that is the connection. But before that, allow me also to call to the podium the following discussants. My brother Felix Odhiambo, Executive Director, Elgia, please come to the podium. My brother Philip Kichana, Head Policy and Partnership, Mzalendo Trust, if you're around, come to the podium. My brother Dennis Omondi, Country Director, NDI, please come to the podium. Marcus, please, are you somewhere? Okay. parties, please come to the podium as well. Will be our discussant. And one more, right. And then my big brother, Stephen Namisule, the Executive Director, Ford Kenya, please also come to the podium. You will be our discussant as well. So this is how the arrangement, the plan here, is to combine electoral reforms and political party processes. All right? So on electoral reforms, we'll have the key speaker being Dr. Karatu Kiemo. But Dr. Karatu will be introduced much better by our colleague and friend, Bwana Franklin Mukwanja, who will also be a key speaker alongside Dr. Kiemo. Karibu sana, Bwana Mukwanja.
Thank you, Peter. Good morning, participants. It is indeed a great pleasure to be here this morning and yesterday as well. But more significantly, to be afforded an opportunity to be the lead speaker and on a topic that I'll be leading my senior brothers, particularly Felix and Dennis, who are way ahead of me in terms of this sector. But I really privilege and honor to do that. My name is Franklin Mukwanja. I serve at the Center for Multi-Party Democracy as the Executive Director. Herein we have political parties who are also joining us and also part of the CMD family. As you understand, political parties are the biggest stakeholders in any election, and we are happy to be here. But to get us started, we will be hearing from Dr. Karatu Kiemo first from the University of Nairobi, whom we jointly worked on a research to expand the knowledge base on the political reforms in Kenya. This is work that was supported by International IDEA, and I will invite him to come and take some 20 minutes to just hammer the critical points on the critical findings and the recommendations. Thereafter, I'll be able to speak to whether political parties are maturing and progressive so that you can then have a panel discussion. Welcome, Dr. Please better appreciate the professor as he comes and encourage him to take at least 15 minutes to continue. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Franklin, the Executive Director of CMD. Good morning, everyone. My name, as I have been introduced, is Karatu Kiemo. I ordinarily teach at University of Nairobi in the Department of Sociology, but I'm here to present findings of a study that I was commissioned to do on behalf of CMD Kenya, and I have been given 20 minutes, so I hope I will do justice to that. The study is titled A Knowledge Product on the Experience of Governance and the Political Reforms in Kenya. I think the key terms here are political governance reforms. And what we want to do is to look at the history to see what has been proposed, what has been implemented, what has not been implemented, and how do we move forward. So now the context of the study is that building as a democracy like we have been doing in Kenya is really not an easy job. Why from 1963 to date, we are still struggling to figure out how to manage our democracy. And we know from other democracies that it may take centuries to do so. And we know some of the way it has been difficult is if you look at the building of Kenya from when it was declared a colony in 1920 and to where we are. It is quite a journey. So in the very recent past, there have been some significant initiatives and proposals to improve our democracy. And some of these which are contained in various reforms all the way from IPPG in 1997 to the Kenya 2010 Constitution include one, the decomposition of power from the center to the 47 units or counties as we know them, which means there has been a talk against the imperial presidency, a talk about devolving power to regional units for purposes of fair representation. And then there has also been an issue that has been there in our minds, and that is the introduction of the position of the Prime Minister, which we know during the joint government, the government of national unity, it was created, and then in a way, the President Uhuru regime maintained it in the form of the chief minister. It has also come in the current administration, so it is something that is in the minds of the politicians, and therefore we need to look at it. Other reforms constitute, and here we are talking about reforms which are either implemented, not legalized, or proposals which have not been registered in any way. And then there is the constitution of the cabinet. Do we make a cabinet which is free from politicians like we did with the 2010 constitution, or do we have members coming from the parliament, that is especially the National Assembly, as it was proposed in the BBI? And then we have abolishing the position of assistant minister, which was done in the 2010 constitution, but then we also saw it sneaked in the position of CAS. And then we also have the issue about reducing the size of government, which was there in political campaigns, but then I think when we get power, we forget that quickly. And this is important because when we look at Kenya's expenditure on government and compare it to a country like Nigeria, which has a cap of 24 members of the cabinet, our expenditure is so much higher compared to Nigeria. Yet Nigeria's economy is much higher, and we are talking about the same size of cabinet. So then there has been talk about that, reducing the current size of government. The UDA campaign talked about it. The Puguza Mizigo bill also talked about it, and so on. Now, what is the key issue here? What is the problem? What is the problem that we are trying to confront? Number one is why and in what ways has the country stagnated in its quest for genuine governance reforms? 63 years and counting. Why? Some of these, we see them to be quite not easy, but very clear in how they are going to be implemented. For example, the gender rule, but then it has failed in 3 parliaments. It has failed 10 times in parliament. So then what is this that ails us? Why is it that these reforms do not see the light at the end of the day, or it doesn't see the end of the day? Because we are ambiguous in whether we want to support it or we don't want to support it. I think we can always call it ambiguity. And then there is the second question. What is it that we can do? What kind of actions can we do as citizens, as civil society, as institutions to make this move forward so that we can realize these reforms? And so those are the two fundamental questions which we should go on thinking about as we go through the presentation. And then the study had the overall objective as to highlight from prior governance and political reform initiatives that might need to be salvaged to enhance the democratization process. That is, we highlight those proposals. What are those suggested reforms that have been suggested, and yet we have not moved very far with them? And then we have the specific objectives being, one, to establish the extent to which the BBI and other governance reforms were inclusionary and equitable as key tenets of democratic governance. Remember the story of BBI and its journey through various litigation. Then the second objective was to assess the conditions and opportunities for sustainable implementation of the proposed reforms. Then we look at the constraints, what are these constraints, and then what kind of recommendations can we draw or suggest for furtherance of democracy in the country. And the scope of our study were these 8 issues that when we looked at literature, we classified the various reform proposals into these 8 issues. Number one is restructuring the executive. You know, there has been suggestions, or there was suggestion that we reduce the size of government. Then somebody says we needed to have this position, this other position. Sometimes we think it is to create jobs for individuals. So the first is to restructure the executive. Number two is restructuring the legislature. And we know there has been this talk about having a shadow cabinet from the opposition, having the leader of opposition in parliament. So these are the debate about restructuring the legislature. Then there is the independence of electoral and administrative institutions, including IBC, other institutions like the police, judiciary, etc. And then there is this question which we consider tricky, the timing of electoral reforms, which emanates from the Krieger report, which came after the 2007-08 post-election violence. And Krieger advised us not to have reforms 2 years to the election. Yet, in the time leading to the 2022 election, we saw we were still working on these laws 6 months to the election. So it is as if we have not learned. I think it is good that we are talking about a post-election symposium to discuss these issues and not talking about post-election violence. So we needed to figure out what to do with this. Then there is the question of fair representation, public participation, combating corruption, and strengthening devolution. These are the key areas that we studied. Let me say for a fact that we will not be able to go through all this in this presentation because it was a huge study. We will just be selective on the issues that we can discuss. So, overview, the general overview is, one, we must recognize that there is sustained pressure for reforms from 1991-1992, when we repealed Section 2A and allowed multi-party participation, and then all up to date. I have seen a note telling me how much time you have to listen to me. You okay? I wanted to hear, yes. You know, I come from a school, so I teach, and I sometimes want to engage students. So now, this just tells us about some gaps in the Constitution, ambiguity in the specific role of Deputy President. Then there is the exclusion of Office of Assistant Minister, etc., etc. This talks about the gaps that we found in the 2010 Constitution with regard to the kind of reforms that have been suggested or that have been implemented even without registration. And then some of we pick 10 key reforms that we can talk about and can be a basis for our discussion. Number one, establishment of the office of the Chief Minister or Prime Minister. We know it is not in law. The structure of government is contained in the Constitution and it does not provide for it. Yet, we have this practice of having it, calling it different things like a Chief Minister, or nothing at all, but then we see it in action that this is what they are intending to do. Question number one is it feasible, knowing that also our government is very bloated compared to other countries like we mentioned earlier, and also is it a question of just sharing power, not decomposing power to lower levels, or lower units, but sharing power at a horizontal level, at the top apex of governance in the country. And then the second one is appointment of cabinet secretaries from the National Assembly, which may cure, for example, in the current regime, we know there are 2 or 3 persons who are nominated as CSs, from the National Assembly. I think there was one from National Assembly and one from Senate. Then you make those places to go for an election. Now here we are only talking about 2. What about tomorrow? What about if somebody chooses to select 3 or 4 or 5 or more from the National Assembly? Then you are forcing those areas to go for a significant by-election, because it might not be just one constituency or 2 constituencies like it is now, but many. Number 3, establishment of the Office of Assistant Ministers. We can go to the next one. Then establishment of the Office of the Leader of Opposition. We know the Constitution does not recognize it. There has been talk, yes, we want the opposition to be strong, yet there is no leader of the opposition as an official position. Then establishment of a shadow cabinet from members of the National Assembly. I think I liked it when there used to be such that somebody would respond to the Minister of Education about CBC, about XYZ. Right now, who is the responder to government initiatives? You have to wait for somebody to talk in Parliament as a by the way, or without any way of tasking that person because that position does not exist. Number 6, professionalization of the recruitment process of IBC commissioners and granting them security of tenure, provision of minimum period by which a vacancy of an IBC member shall be filled. At present, The 2011 IBC Act provides the time as 14 days upon declaration of a vacancy. That is when a selection panel shall be appointed. But the time by which this has to be, the time by which the member has to be in the group is not specified. You know very well there was a time that there were only 3 IBC commissioners, 4 were not recruited. It took so long, there was nobody to appoint them because the panel had not been constituted. And today, it is not very difficult to relate the drama that is going on with that omission. So we need to take care of IBC as an institution so that there is predictability for today, tomorrow, and the other day. And then number 8, amend the 2010 Constitution to provide for minimum period by which any electoral-related legal amendment can be made before an election. That is the question of also related to the timing of the election. Amend the 2011 Elections Act to provide for the mechanism by which individuals declared ineligible due to culpability to corruption and abuse of office by, I know time is up, but just go back one more time, please. Number 9. Individuals culpable to corruption and abuse of office, those who are declared culpable, should be barred by IBC from contesting in an election. I think the drama is there. And if you remember, even at the very last days, allow me to mention these names. There was the question of Karogo Dhangwa as vying for Senate in somewhere in, I think in Kiambu. And then there was the case of Mike Buvisonko. Mike Buvisonko is saying, I am going to the East African Court of Justice 21 days to the election. What if that court cleared him? We needed to have space. We need to have space so that we let IBC do its business when there is no litigation, no case in court, that it is just time to organize the election. And then lastly, promote the fiduciary culture by which political office bearers should take responsibility for failure in office by tendering resignation. And this can be done through our efforts here. Why? Because I would rather die than resign. What are we doing with the recall clause? You remember it? Can we reactivate it? Is there a way of reactivating it? Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you, Prof. That is our study, and I'm sure the panel will speak to it. Thank you, Patience Nyange, for reminding us that this is a manual. It is not a panel. Right? And I think we need to improve on that. Marcus, please help us to do that. Can we please see the ladies and gentlemen representing political parties? Please, can you stand? Can we all stand? And I'm sure you are on the panel, but you can still stand. Can we appreciate these ladies and gentlemen? And I will tell you why. Please be seated. Have our political parties become mature and progressive? In this year's election, out of the 98 political parties, 78 participated in elections. 49 secured elective positions. I think this was the highest number of registered political parties offering candidates in an election. One would want to ask whether this is about maturity or the motivation was the impending political parties fund following the change of the formula from number of elected positions to the number of votes garnered. That question we need to answer. Major parties in previous elections, but are currently part of our political party's graveyard, yet their leaders remain active in other outfits. The parties and the players, same faces, different teams. We have many parties that I will not mention because they are my employers, but they are in our political party's graveyard. So what do we do with the 20 that did not field candidates in the 2022 general elections? Why do political parties exist? This begs the question, are political parties mere purpose, mere special vehicle, mere special purpose vehicles for elections? I think it is incumbent on these parties to continue engaging their members systematically. The Political Parties Fund forms the basis for financing political parties in Kenya, and my brother from the Register of Political Parties is here. Consequently, qualifying political parties are largely funded by the taxpayer. But the question that we need to ask is expanding funding to political parties a guarantee that they will be stronger and accountable institutions? What is our previous experience? This happened at some point. Is that why we must be fully accountable, first as Kenyans? Does this accountability apply to political parties that don't qualify to receive the political parties fund? I'm asking questions because we have determined that the business of political parties is not important to very elite and sophisticated Kenyans like the one seated here. And it's only the responsibility of the few ladies and gentlemen that stood up when I asked that representatives of political parties do that. After all, political parties exist because of their membership. Unfortunately, their red flags abound in the accountability sector. In the accountability space, it's a challenge. And we need to interrogate the question as to whether the political parties fund is an important vehicle towards progressing our political parties and making them more accountable and maturer. I will shift my attention to the significant question of our party, our political culture. We are all celebrating, and it's great that we are sanitizing our political fabric from the stains of violence. And that is good progress. And the contribution of political parties cannot be underestimated. Undeniably, however, we have more challenges beyond violence. For instance, to what extent are Kenyans willing to embrace undemocratic practices? I'll mention a few. Do you have a clue about the ideology of your political party? How many of Kenya's registered parties indeed have a defining ideology? Is it true that a good percentage of these parties were formed with the express purpose of being sold at a profit to aspiring politicians? These questions are important. Ideologies are the deep-seated set of beliefs that must be lived and seen in legislative priorities of the party. But to what extent are individual Kenyans keen on these things? Should party offices just exist for the sake of inspection by the Office of the Register of Political Parties? How should party branches metamorphose into hubs of relevant, positive political activities at the grassroots level? When will political parties hold regular democratic party elections for all office bearers from the national level to the ward level, including the former ruling party and the current ruling party? They can only afford acting party officials. Jubilee governed us for 5 years without substantive intra-party elections. But before we cast a stone at such parties, we must look hard in the mirror and discern the logs in the eyes of our own preferred parties. If they are not tribal groupings, they are probably under the exclusive control of party leaders and a select few. And that is the reality. If you go to the performance of political parties in the 2022 elections, one of the clearer issues was that the amendment early this year asked political parties to use their membership register. I am not sure how many of you participated in the party primaries and which register was used. But we acknowledge that there are challenges in terms of using on register of members for by political parties to preside over their nominations. Their party primaries. We also witnessed a weak compliance to legal framework, notably the 2/3 gender rule. Of course, we will argue that that was disrupted by the court ruling, but also had a challenge in terms of development of party lists. As a matter of fact, the IEBC in November 2021 returned all the nomination rules of political parties to ask them to be compliant to some of these things. In terms of the electoral dispute resolutions, we have had speakers, and I want to associate with those remarks, that there is less and less disputes. I think the assistant registrar of political parties say to a tune of 60% reduction. But this is attributed to the, of course, the enhanced efficacy of internal dispute resolution mechanisms, and of course the change in the modes of nominations. We have parties now allowed to do direct nomination. And of course the expansion and decentralization of the political parties disputes tribunal contributed to that. And of course the terms that have been used, that we had a more quieter political party primaries. In terms of campaign financing, we have a long way to go. I reckon that we have a complicit voter, we have a defective law, and we have a reluctant parliament. For those who have followed this discussion, we know that all the way from 2005, the WACO draft, the campaign financing aspects, provisions in the Constitution, were actually removed by the committee that was working on the Constitution. It is the committee of experts that later on reintroduced those aspects. And we have seen all manner of excuses in terms of not doing it. But the fact is, the law that as it is defective. We have a reluctant parliament to make any changes. And more so, more worrying for us, is that we have a voter who is a senior crook than the politicians, and is the biggest stakeholder to the criminal enterprise that is an accountable election that we have. In terms of violence, of course, we witness less violence, which is attributable to efforts by peace actors, and the religious leaders are very keen this. We also had security agencies more professional and impartial in the way they acted. And of course, that makes it very difficult to incite, for politicians to take advantage and incite the public. In terms of technology, I think the Registrar's Office did quite commendable work, automation of services, especially certification of party lists, member registers, and independent candidates certification. But what we have not looked at is the issue of violence online that we have to deal with. A lot of women who are engaging in our post-election inter-party reflections point to those challenges that have not been addressed. Allow me just 5 minutes to cover coalitions, and then I'll conclude. Kenya has witnessed coalitions since 2002. When the first coalition arrangement, the National Rainbow Coalition, won the general elections. The impact of evolving coalitions on multi-party democracy in Kenya, therefore, needs to be critically examined. Certainly, there are both positive and negative impacts that relate to the larger political system, governmental system, and parties themselves. On the positive side, you would say coalitions, especially grand coalitions, are all-inclusive and moderate the polarization of the country along party lines. Coalitions also make it possible for key social cleavages, especially ethno-regional ones, to be represented in government through their respective parties and to have a meaningful voice in both the executive and the legislature. But there are also negative effects and impacts of coalition arrangements on multi-party democracy that have raised some doubts on the efficacy of coalitions. We have seen that they weaken ideologized politics to the extent that they are marriages of convenience that bring together parties of diverse political orientation in their raw quest for power. But coalitions cannot be wished away. The best practice is therefore to strengthen them in order to minimize their negative impacts on multipartyism. And therefore, as CMD, we find that the legislation for coalition building to regulate the formation and management of coalition governments, to protect individual party ideologies and platforms, to ensure that the voters are still able to make real choices amongst the competing parties and formations, to stabilize coalition governments, and to strengthen parties is very useful. In regard to issue-based politics, I think 2022 was the one election in Kenya's history whose agenda was issue-based on most counts. The two major coalitions, that's Kenya Kwanza and Azimio, campaigned on issue-based, on policy agendas, on policy-based agendas. For those of us who can remember, Azimio coalition leveraged on its good governance and anti-corruption as the basis for building a prosperous country, and the Kenya Kwanza coalition focused on what they dubbed as the bottom-up economics, aimed at growing the economy by facilitating the bottom majority to grow. Questions of public debt, cost of living, unemployment, industrialization, foreign policy, among others, were prosecuted on political diocese in every public rallies. For example, the role of China in Kenya's economy, previously a question considered a non-issue in any campaign, made its way in both coalition conversations. The Azimio coalition took issue with what they considered irresponsible borrowing from China, while the Kenya Kwanza team took issue with the economic disruption brought about by cheap, low-quality Chinese products flooding the market. And of course, proliferation of small businesses run by Chinese nationals and Chinese workers currently flooding the Kenyan labor market. These are the politics that we're talking about as more issue-based. And of course, the institutional framework that manages elections in Kenya is far from perfect. And this was aptly noted by the Supreme Court ruling on 5th September. However, I reckon that there has been progressive evolution that has systematically built the confidence of Kenyans in believing that there is a place for strong, credible, accountable, and transparent institutions at different levels of government, and being part of an electoral architecture that is capable of delivering free, fair, and peaceful elections. This confidence in institutions has played a significant role in diffusing tensions and providing avenues for addressing grievances, thereby preventing violent conflict during elections. As I conclude, the Kenyan election process of 2022 displayed a maturing democracy at various fronts. In the words of the professor of politics, former President Moi, siasa ni maisha, siasa mbaya, maisha mbaya. Because political parties are the nerve centers of organized politics, it follows that bad political parties beget a low-quality life for the citizenry. That's why changing our political party culture must be an urgent, lasting priority. This involves changing our perceptions of political engagement. I'll give you an example. Currently, political actors are regarded in the corporate world as high-risk or politically exposed persons who should not hold certain offices or lead initiatives, yet these same institutions covertly fund political activities. It's time for this hypocrisy to stop, because being politically active should be celebrated, not demonized. And that is why I asked the representative of political parties to proudly stand and be applauded by all of you. As of March this year, the registrar told us there are 24 million Kenyans who are registered political party members. These men and women must take responsibility to infuse ideology, transparency, and accountability into their respective political parties. And these men and women are here. As long as these men and women who are here remain passive, party leaders will keep using them for political relevance. Political parties must lay out legislative agendas that are in sync with their ideologies, not just their ever-changing manifestos. Party leaders, officials, and members must take responsibility. We must all take responsibility for our country's sorry political party culture. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Okay. So let's applaud our presenters for that great work. I'll just be calling on our discussants to share their thoughts, their perspectives in just about 5 minutes. I'll start with my brother Felix. Just about 5 minutes.
Thank you, Peter, and good morning. Is it good morning? Good afternoon, everyone. I will be very, very brief, and I beg the moderator to stop me if I go beyond 5 minutes. I want to limit my comments, brief comments, to the presentation on governance and electoral reforms by Dr. Kiemo, on the understanding that the political party section that has been presented by Franklin, we have very, very good and worthy discussants, including practitioners like Bwana Namshule here. And the starting point is to attempt to answer the question by Dr. Kiema, that why, and by the way, it's a very good paper, Daktari, and I hope we will be able to share, you'll be able to share it with us, as well as share it with Franklin for that matter. Why is it that since 63, when we go, 63, when we got our independence, we've had a persistent discussion about reforms? And secondly, why, despite the restoration of multi-party democracy and the promulgation of 2010 Constitution, which, as I noted yesterday, was hailed as very transformative, we knew that it would substantially change the governance framework, that we still, as a country, have or talk about reforms, and why, despite holding 7 multi-party elections, we still talk about electoral reforms. The answer lies in a phenomenon in this continent that is called choiceless democracies. And this terminology was coined by a professor called Tandikwe Mkandawire, and he defined choiceless democracies as countries that can choose but cannot vote. That's why it's choiceless democracies. And comparatively across the continent, that seems to be the problem. The second issue is that I call usually the inconclusive electoral cycle. In this country since '92, we have had an election or different elections have demonstrated serious challenges, shortcomings, and problems, and these problems are not conclusively addressed, and they are subsequently imported in the next election. That is what is called inconclusive electoral cycle. Talk, for example, about election management. or electoral reforms. In every election since 92, we've been talking about IEBC or the election management body or political parties and things like that, or election technology or and how we manage our results. But we do not address them conclusively, and they recur in subsequent elections. And finally, the question on another problem, why we keep on talking about reforms, is a phenomenon called state and elite capture of the reform process. Usually, the reform environment is characterized by utter bad faith, with the full knowledge that this, even the 2010 Constitution, issues of compliance, as well as even the fact that even if these reforms are enacted, there is always the institutionalized impunity with the knowledge that these reforms will not be enacted. Two processes come to mind. Just before the 2010 Constitution, there was once this committee of experts had given a draft, which attempted to include issues of, in the executive that Dr. mentioned, including the introduction of the office of the Prime Minister, shadow cabinets, leader of official opposition, etc. And that the committee of experts report also gave us a very clear distinction and design of the legislature by having the Senate as the upper house and the National Assembly as the lower house. But what did the elites under the Parliamentary Select Committee that was chaired by Abdikadir do? They sat in Naivasha for about a month and radically changed the design and structure of the Constitution as was drafted by the Committee of Experts. And we ended up with a reduced, or what we sought to cure in the old Constitution of imperial presidency was somehow imported in the new Constitution. And secondly, the problem that we now have is the way the legislature is designed. Of the Senate, but with a restricted mandate. And the reason was very deliberate. The membership of the Select Committee were members of Parliament, National Assembly. So they made sure that they reduced or diminished the powers of the Senate. And so this is really the environment that we operate in. In conclusion, let me say this. I think this 2022 elections offers a perfectly good opportunity to begin to relook and ask fundamental questions such as what has been raised by Daktari here. A country can have what looks like or a fairly good elections, and that has been a consistent theme across the various presentations, such as what we had in 2022, that is worth improving on. But if these reforms are not addressed, then you can have a perfectly good election that is followed by a very chaotic and shambolic election. And this country has walked that path before. In 2002, we had probably the best election in our history. And then we thought we had reached it as a democracy. There was complacency, and then people just retreated back. And 2002 elections, as you can recall, was followed by 2007 election, which is the closest we have had to go as a country to what is called a civil war. Thank you very much, and I think the others will recommend.
Let's thank my brother for that. Let me get my brother from, what's your name? Sorry? Yes, from Zalendo Trust, Ndugu Philip, please just come make a few remarks. Thank you very much. Thank you. Sanitize this. Just some.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Good afternoon once more. When the chairman for JLAC was here, he said sometimes you can greet people and they behave like they don't like you or you don't like them. So I'm not going to use the one for the politicians of, let me see your hands and all that. But allow me just to quickly make some few observations. And thank you, Daktari, for the presentation you've done. I don't know if you have depressed us further or we are still okay. We are very optimistic that these reforms can be made so that we see a better country in Kenya. But just to quickly begin from the political parties, and I'm not an expert in this, but there are questions that are already coming out, even the amendments that we even recently made. And I alluded that yesterday when I spoke about the amendment, and I say that already people are saying that the political parties are alienating the common mwananchi in the participation. And one was the amendment that introduced the various mechanisms that political parties could now choose to decide who are the candidates. So essentially, Frank, when people are saying that afadhali tupatane kwa debe badala ya boardroom, I think this negotiated democracy, people are feeling alienated and they're not very happy about it. But I wish also to speak quickly to the issue that when Wetangula was making a decision, it made me remember that one of the contestations that were being fought with the Political Parties Amendment Act by Duale was the powers that ORPP was going to have under the new political establishment. And this reminded me that during this time round, when this contestation again arose and the speaker had to make this determination, he actually declared documents submitted by the ORPP and declared them as strange documents before the House. Ladies and gentlemen, who is the custodian of political parties and documents as we speak? So thank you. I wouldn't wish to go much into that. Let me also speak on the issue of IBC and the legal reforms. I think Daktari makes a very good recommendation that 2 years into an election, we ideally should never have these legislative reforms being entertained. And IBC, even IBC itself, has come out. If you look at the 2017, the last election post-evaluation report, one of its key recommendation is kindly stick to the Kriegler recommendation that we shouldn't be having these reforms into an election. And for me, it seems that IBC knows where the problem is. If you look at that evaluation report, looking at the 2017 election, when they were, reflecting, it's their own assessment. They identified a raft of these things we keep talking about. Just to pick a few, IBC talks about the challenge of hearing a presidential petition within the limits. If you check in that report, you'll find that recommendation there. It talks about the issue of staggering of elections. I think if IBC was here, it would tell us why that has become a challenge for them to carry out those. Like how many ballots do we get when we're going into an election? 6. So they were proposing that we could stagger those elections in terms of days and all that. And all these recommendations are well enumerated. My question has always been, why are these reforms or recommendations not followed through? Let me just leave that again as a question for us to reflect, and maybe let me just quickly speak to my last topic on the issue of Chapter 6, please. I will say this. The issue of implementation of Chapter 6 has been quite frustrating. And for me, the key institutions that have failed us on the implementation of Chapter 6 are, of course, Parliament being complicit in it, the various constitutional bodies that have also been established to implement this Chapter 6, but also the executive by its behavior. Because then, what Chapter 6 essentially seeks to achieve is accountability from these people we gave office. The judiciary, and I can see Honorable Mulochi here, I think the judiciary for me has been the biggest, again, failure on this. When the executive has failed to live to the letter and spirit of this constitution, the judiciary has refused to tell them to stop. I wish to note that in the past, we have had very good decisions that we have celebrated. We've had a judge telling, for example, the Governor Kiambu and the Governor Nairobi that they are not fit to sit in office. And that decision went all the way to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court made a very good determination and says, if you have been impeached, you shouldn't hold a public office. In Justice Ngenye's case and Justice Mumbi, they were screaming out aloud in their judgment. Like you reading the judgment, you could literally hear them screaming out and asking, what is it to the office that you sit? How do people look at that office that you sit? It is not about the governor's personality or himself. It's about that office you hold. And that is where we find the courts, they have failed because they have chosen, one, to implement the political rights. I remember one time we were among the first people who took the late Senator Kajwang, because we thought he wasn't supposed or fit to hold public office. But the court again asked and put a very interesting question, that the people of Homa Bay have a right to participate and choose that kind of a person. So we've had decisions that have bothered on, criminality standards and have totally refused to look at the ethical part of it. That is, it is not the individual that we're talking about. It's not Sonko, it's not Waititu when these people are being asked on the integrity questions. It is the office they hold. So I totally believe that it is time we need to reflect on the issue of Chapter 6. It was a very popular chapter in our constitution and in the voting of this constitution. And I don't believe for a second that the public have abandoned the ideals that have been set in this Constitution 2010. Thank you very much.
Clap for him. Just allow me to recognize the ED Kenya Editors Guild who has joined us. Karibu sana. We also have a representative, or one or two, from the Parliamentary Committee, Justice and Legal Affairs Committee. They are also here. Please feel free to interact with them on this topic that we are talking about, electoral reforms. They are around. You will be able. Okay, if who has come from the JLAC representative who is here? Yes, he's right there. Please interact with him. We'll carry this topic on electoral reforms to lunch because JLAC is here. So engage actively. Allow me to call my brother Dennis Omondi to just go. Then I'll have Stephen to come after. Then ORPP will round it up. I care about your health.
Good afternoon once again. All right. Allow me to join Frank in commending and appreciating the role political parties play in the governance of this nation. I think most of us underestimate the role that political parties play. What I will challenge us is actually the health of democracy and democratic institutions is clearly mirrored by how much us as citizens hold them accountable. The more we do not hold parties or institutions of governance accountable, the more we will complain and we never sort the problem. So I needed to open with that and to encourage us, particularly the members of the civil society, to get more engaged with political parties and strengthen those loose ends so that we can actually have a stronger democracy and a multi-party democracy. I don't want to take a lot of time because I think Frank quite drove us on the right direction. But I want to start with institutionalizing political parties as an issue that we all need to look at and consider the role of the party membership. I do think, and I think it's Felix who talked about it, that political parties have been left to the elites. The members play a very insignificant role in the management and governance. And I want to believe that as civil society, that is one area we need to ingest ourselves and ask that members require political parties as institutions of membership to engage them substantially and meaningfully so that we improve the governance. The second thing, and I always ask myself, where are political parties, not the politicians who are elected, where are political parties in between elections? And I think there are opportunities that the Constitution of Kenya presents for political parties to continually engage themselves in between elections in the governance of a country. If somebody was running in a political party as a governor and they fail, some of the issues they had in their manifesto will be very important to be driven through the political party within the assemblies. And I think that's how we can continue also engaging the party membership, the party branches in the governance of our society, so that we have plurality of perspectives and the differences in opinion, what they are now calling the shadow. You know, we can actually have those ones influencing how we govern. But that also takes me to, therefore, that political parties need to strengthen their branches. But this also implies that the civil society have also to hold political parties accountable. We do know that there are 47 political parties today. Of course, the issue is still in court, so we don't know how that will spin. But 47 political parties are going to be getting the political parties fund, which is public resources, right? How do they spend them? I want to imagine that strengthening their branches according to what the political parties fund states should be part of what we hold them accountable for. Because, and then we require them to engage in the governance at those levels. The other aspect that I wanted to talk to us about is the issue of party primaries. And I know ahead of the elections, we changed the Political Parties Act to require political parties to do the indirect nomination. The outcome of it is on the positive side that there was calm in the electoral environment. The negative side of it is that there was exclusion in the aspects of the outcome of those party primaries. But the civil society must actually encourage and awaken the middle class to engage in party primaries. The middle class are very good at complaining, and what we like to do here, speaking good English. This has to change. Look, party primaries, the people who participate there, they give you candidates to elect. So when you don't participate, you go to rubber stamp a choice of others. I think it is high time we challenge ourselves to engage more meaningfully in party primaries so that we see the change. But the second aspect is, how do we ensure that the nomination, or the party organs generally, the NEC, the boards, you know, the dispute mechanism, are inclusive in themselves and require representation of citizens who are sitting here. And of course, then I end by talking about the legal framework and whether that really satisfied what we thought it was to. And maybe just to issue a statement that I think reforms will be a continual process until you die. When you die, you leave it for others to continue with it. A society that does not look at reforms is a dead society. We learn from our experiences and we continue shifting to make sure that the things that are present are serving the present society. And what serves us today might not serve my children. They might think, mzee alikuwa mjinga sana. Hivi ndio walikuwa naishi. They change it, right? But for us, it served us at the time it lived. The other aspect is the party funding. And I think we need to look at, now we are talking of 47. At least we came from 3 parties getting all the funding. Now we are 47. But is it sufficient? Is there something we can do? Is this something that requires us to move? but really to tie it with the party primaries. If Kenyans think that the party primaries is an important thing, and political parties are saying that we don't have sufficient resources to conduct democratic party primaries, then are we saying that we are able to fund political parties primaries through a fund? Are those considerations for us? Are they necessary? You know, what about the role of PPLC, the Political Parties Liaison Committee? I have the view that I think a reform needs to be looked at so that we strengthen who actually goes to that body. The representation of political parties, in my opinion, should be at the higher levels, maybe the secretary or the chairperson who can make decisions for the party. And until that happens, I think their role will continue to be meandering. But that also takes it to me, if we think as a society that the role of political parties liaison committee is important, don't we need to fund its functions? Don't we need to allocate resources directly rather than relying on the register of political parties for resources to continue the engagement of dialogue and engaging with electoral institutions in between elections? Last but not least is the party hopping. Listen, I think that that law needs to be reviewed. We have independent members who are not really independent. They have to fail from the party for them to get independent. And they are literally, I call them the party independent candidate. They are really from the party. It's only that a door was locked, they jumped out, and they got elected. I do think that, and talking as somebody who was engaged very deeply during the Political Parties Act, the conceptualization was that if you don't want to run with the party, then run as an independent. We do not say run with the party when you fail, then go as independent. I think that is something that we need to look at ahead of the next election. And I want to end by a more controversial perspective for me on the issue of campaign financing. My personal perspective is that I don't think we need to regulate how much politicians use, but I think we need to strengthen the disclosure. Because you are not giving them the money, we just need them to disclose how much they spent. Let them tell us. The one who spent 10 million, tell us. The one who spent 100 million, tell us. Then we need to strengthen other institutions to ask, where did you get the 100 million that you spent? Because what are we dealing with here? We are dealing with the impact of illicit money in politics. And when we don't give politicians money, asking them that they can't spend 100 million, which they have, and they can only spend 20, first, we don't have mechanism to ensure that he didn't spend it. So let them disclose it, and then we can actually then track, when we strengthen those institutions, how they got it, who are they affiliated with, and that will tell us the ringing of the corruption cartel. That's my perspective. I've seen it work in other jurisdictions in the US. That's really what they do. But I know that's very controversial, and I rest my case. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I expect this from Dennis, as usual, to be a little bit controversial. But that is a good point which we all need to think through, because JLAC chair told us yesterday that Parliament, National Assembly, both houses of Parliament, and even the MCAs have a problem with this law, and it will not be operationalized. So we think about other means, right? So we have to think controversially. Allow me to call Steve to come and share with us perspectives in 5 minutes from political parties' experience. Karibu ndugu.
Thank you very much, my good people. This fellow is Stephen Namushule, Executive Director for Kenya, and a passionate member of the electoral process in this country since the days of Montgomery, Mongovia, Chesoni, Kivitu, Hassan, and now Jebkati. First, a big thanks to our development partners, the civil society, and the state actors that have brought us together to reflect on how far we have come from the last election up to now. What bad manners did we indulge in, and what good manners did we do so again? And then we take stock of that and see what to carry forward into the 2027 general election. May I first thank CMD Kenya, the Apex organization, or the union of political parties in this country, because without political parties, it can't be there. Thanks a lot for undertaking this research on where we are, just showing us the mix-up and allowing us to think about it and see which way we can progress better. But from the presentations made from yesterday till now, what I see is that despite the level of our literacy in Kenya, we're still messy, we're still noisy, like Weta put it. There are quite a lot of things, very simple things that we are unable to fix. And I want to get into the litany of these things. What are they that we should look at and bang quickly to ensure that we have a clear vision on how we want to conduct our elections in 2017 and 2027, I'm sorry. Now, the first thing, problem on our table is that up to this level of our civilization, as a country, we have not put straight our ideological orientation. So this side talk about no ideology in political parties, very annoying. And the rest of the things that degrade the political thinking of our masters in this country must come to an end. Now, looking at the provisions in Articles 91 and 92 of the Constitution of Kenya 2010, it clearly tells us political parties about what to do. The key being promotion of the values and the spirit of the Constitution. Now tell me, what ideology underlies our Constitution 2010? Is that what the party should promote? In the first place, is it there or not there? If not there, now we must find it. We must define it. Go to the left, go to the right, or whichever direction that defines the values in our Constitution of Constitution Constitution 2010 of Kenya. What is the underlying ideology? Looking at the Human Rights Charter, looking at Article 10, and the rest of the things. Where are we in terms of ideology? So when you tell us political parties that we have no ideology, I think you're abusing the Constitution, because that is what we are charged to promote. So we have an ideology. Think about it. So let's fix it clearly in the next dispensation so that we remove this abuse, or else tutashikana mashate hapa when you tell us that we don't have ideology as political parties. Number two, whoever messed up IPGG formula for constituting IBC, I think brought this country to a very serious precipice. Under IPGG regime, I think we had a very stable electoral process from 97 up to 2007. When we lost it, we have never found stability and a trust at the IBC until tomorrow. So, Chief Moderator, I think this is another issue that we must fix as we move forward. What is it that we should do to ensure that we build trust and confidence at the IBC that has been lacking since 2007? Number 3, according to me, from the presentations made, is about these mediocre syndromes that we carry on, and we have lacked a solution to that. The syndrome of my election was stolen. I didn't lose an election. Yeah, this is common in Kenya, that when you lose, an election has been stolen. How fairly, it is still the same case. So how do we crack this mediocrity? How do we get out of this syndrome so that people winning can enjoy their victory, those losing can go back to reconstruct themselves honorably, and they come or bounce back? We also, now 4th, we have a serious issue, but it can be managed. And this is the issue of sleeping giants, state actors, civil society, that are supposed to rise up to the occasion during the election time, even before and after, to ensure that we have a clean and a sanitized electoral process. I'm talking about steaming up NCIC. Thanks for the good job you did last time. Otherwise, before, you were more or less of a sleeping dog, and yet you are the guardian angel of peace in Kenya. Now, when I hear of Transparency International, I think this is the first time I'm hearing it today. Where have you been, brothers and sisters? I think you've been asleep for too long. Can you define yourselves and engage political parties and other state actors, please, to be seen to be actively contributing to the stability of this country? Now, we also have various, can I say, organs that must be reactivated, various codes in our systems of governance, particularly the Elections Act 2011, the Political Parties Act 2011. I'm referring to the annexes or the schedules, which are very important. And if popularized, like we did try last time, I think can help bring sanity in our electoral process and give us good leaders. The first one is the political parties' code of conduct. Let's keep it up in popularizing it, followed by the electoral code of conduct. You look at those 2 codes, beautiful. If adhered to, and if the candidates and the voters are meant to know what they carry, they'll behave and give us peace during elections. There are quite a number of other areas that we need to touch, particularly Campaign Financing Act, which we need to streamline, the Election Offences Act. Let's breathe life into these statutes and popularize them so that candidates get to know what it is. The issue of candidates, if I tell you how we receive and engage them during our elections, is another story to tell another day, because most of them seem to be quite ignorant. They have the passion, but they don't have the law. So we need to work on it to ensure that we induct them into what they ought to know, I think, to run a peaceful and clean election. The faith-based organizations, I think you need to scale up. You are not just ordinary at our secular level. You belong to a higher calling, and what we call for is your proper connection to God. Get messages, come back and tell us the best things God wants for this country. Wacheni siasa. I would also, I've also observed that another issue that we need to look at in fixing our next regime of election, I think, is the media. Looking at what happened previously, some media were taken to court and they had to enter into a private settlement to pay heavy fines for slandering and misbehavior. So we would like this state actor, the social actor, I think, to sanitize up and do the best for this country to ensure that you will respect each other and we also educate people instead of disinforming people. May I stop here? I have a lot of things to say, but I wouldn't like to do so. I'm sure they'll come up through my co-panelists. And for now, I say thank you for listening to this fellow. We meet again.
Thank you. Thank you very much. The Office of the Registrar of Political Parties represented here will just round it up. Then we have to break for lunch at 1:30 exactly. So we'll have a short plenary. And we also would like to request the Right Reverend, the Archbishop of Mombasa, to come just share with us a few things as he prays, as he blesses the lunch when we break.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. Good afternoon once again. My name is Loserian Tukey. I work with the Office of the Registrar of Political Parties. I'm a senior compliance officer. It is very unfortunate that I have to speak after such eminent gentlemen, but I'm speaking for the regulator. And I want to answer a simple question that I saw in the program. Have our political parties become mature? Briefly, after I give out, I think, 3 or 4 points, you'll be able to tell me, or you'll be able to be the judge if political parties have become mature, considering the last electoral cycle. Political parties have been demonized by most of us who are here, but as the regulator, we work with political parties very well. In the lead up to the last general election, 82 actually political parties participated in the elections. And all these political parties that participated were compliant in line with the law, in line with Articles 91 and 92 of the Constitution, and in line with the Political Parties Act. Their governing body, correct. Their constitutions, correct. Their membership, they had at least 24,000 members in at least 24 counties, correct. So meaning on the side of the compliance and in law, they participated in the elections as they should. Number 2 is on the nominations. We had extensive nominations this year. Unlike the previous years, hii mwaka ilikuwa ya mchujo. We had so many political parties that participated in direct nominations and indirect nominations. Members of the public, members of political parties were able to participate in the primaries, and these primaries were publicized by both the political parties and the Office of the Registrar. We visited, we were across the country in the month of April. We were able to see the various ways that the political parties are nominating their candidates. There were extensive interviews. There were newspaper adverts by political parties because they wanted the best of the cream. So on that aspect, in terms of the nominations, we cannot say we are where we were in 2017 or earlier. So this year was a big improvement. In terms of institutionalization of political parties, which is my third point, we have the NDCs. Most political parties held their NDCs late last year and early this year, whereby you could see at Bomas of Kenya, at KICC, and so many other places, political parties and their supporters were able to congregate and endorse their choices, either for presidential candidates, either for coalitions. Members of political parties through their NDCs were able to participate in the decision-making of political parties. I think political parties deserve an applaud, right? We now have stronger necks. The governing bodies of political parties are now stronger as compared to the previous years. We were able to have interactions with the Women League, with the Youth League, with the PWD leagues, and the election boards and dispute tribunal boards, the IDRMs. This time, unlike the previous years, we were not just meeting, we could not just see the faces of the political parties. I now believe I know more SGs than anyone here. I think on top of my head, I know about 81 or 82 SGs on top of my head. Meaning we have political parties that are not run by the big man syndrome. All political parties now are held accountable. Their organs are held accountable. So we can say we are not yet there, but we are on the road of institutionalizing political parties. And inclusion of SIGs. This year, unlike the previous years, we have had the most, and I wish IBC were here to confirm, we have had the most SIGs running for office and winning as compared to 2017 and compared to the previous years. We saw women and PWD. Women were leading the campaigns for political parties. They were a big issue in this campaign, in this last election. We saw PWDs have also been elected into office through their political parties. The SIGs are no longer waiting for token nominations, and political parties are enabling this. They are halving the nomination fees for candidates by political parties for SIGs is now half. So that is an effort by political parties to ensure all these special interest groups have an opportunity to participate in the election. And finally, we have had a structured dialogue between the political parties, the IEBC, and the regulator through the platform that is the Political Parties Liaison Committee. And I can see the secretary I saw the secretary to the committee here. Yes, perhaps he could just wave. Yes, that is Mr. Taabu. He's the executive director of NAC Kenya, and also the PPLC secretary. Through that platform, the registrar, the IEBC, and political parties were able to have dialogue on every issue. Perhaps it could not make it to the media. Perhaps our media brothers and sisters did not find that as news. But at many instances, political parties and the registrar and the commission sat down and discussed issues and made solutions on a table through dialogue. And that is all we hope for. That is all we had hoped for. As I conclude, I will not, from my personal perspective, I say it is an emphatic yes. Yes, political parties have matured. Is there room for improvement? Of course, there's always room for improvement. However, we are not where we were 10 years ago. Thank you very much.
But here we are. We say that we made a commitment to break for lunch at 1:30. So there are two things that are lying between us and lunch. One is plenary questions, and two, just our Right Reverend sharing with us just a few things and blessing the lunch for us. It's not choiceless democracy. I had the term here. Choiceless democracy. This one is, we make a deliberate choice. Okay? We ask just a few questions. Is that in order? Okay. Silence means no. Okay. Silence means no. So we have consensus that I just call upon Right Reverend to share a few things and bless the lunch, then we break. Is that the... Okay, I see that is agreed. That carries the day. So allow me to retire the panel, our presenters and our discussants, and let's clap for them for the great work done. Thank you very much. Right Reverend, allow me to request you to come to the podium and just share with us a few thoughts on your experience and just some guiding thoughts as we walk this journey. We were discussing with you and we agreed this is a journey. Then you very kindly bless the lunch for us.
Thank you very much for having me. Apologize yesterday I wasn't able to come, but today we, as members of the faith-based team and community, we had a meeting in the morning, and I shared with them that I'm invited here. So greetings from all the faith-based teams we have. This has also been part of our team in a way. We have members here present through Justice and Peace, the faith-based teams like the Muslim, the Christians, Hindus, and so on. I chose to pick up two things and ask myself, which you also can ask yourself. Where were you? Where was I? What did I do during the preparations to the elections? And at the end of the day, where did I vote? What did I see? What did I observe? I was an observer in Mombasa, very close to the showground there, but my constituency was the Nyali side, and in fact the whole diocese, 4 counties. So as faith-based teams where we met on several levels, one is the National Dialogue Conference, where we bring members of the faith together, searching together how do we help out, how do we become part of the solution, not part of the problem. And for many, all of us, many times we have met severally at different levels. The level of National Dialogue, we have joined ELOG severally, and at the same time, as a smaller team of DRG, which is basically a dialogue reference group. This did not start these elections. 2017, we were there. And even before then, 2002, we were there. Those times of Muge, we were also there. The time of Ndingis, we were there. And the time of Koril, we were there. We've been always walking, journeying together. And this, I want to appreciate all the stakeholders here and appreciate all the engagement you have shown and the interest of the country at heart. So with you, I want to clap for ourselves for this occasion. The second thing I want to bring up is, what did I do this particular time different? We were charged with a very difficult moment. As you all know, the country coming out of Corona, and in fact continued with Corona issues, the country falling into all kinds of issues like famine, and yet we were not allowed to borrow or ask partners to support us. But however, we want to thank all those who worked with us, and they are all here. They are all here, and others who may not be here, who supported our initiatives to have all forums. Our main forums, we held them different places, but at the same time geared towards imparting aspects of civic education in a very humble way, meeting people at the small Christian communities, meeting people at forums of our own church and mosques, and so on and so on and so on. And I believe that effort bore fruit. As we came towards the elections, many of us were charged with certain areas to observe, including joining who we call international observers. In Mombasa, people from Uganda, from Caribbeans, from UK, and others and others and others. And what happened that time? Our messages towards a peaceful election, justice election, we were there with the people every day, in every forum. And we created forums of church and Muslims and Hindus and everybody else. The climax comes in at the time of tallying at Bomas. We had a team observing all through of church, Muslim, Hindus, and taking turns so that we ensure we secure the Kenya we want. And I believe all of you observed two things, very, very important for us. The material day, I remember very clearly, the day of the 14th, as I finished my celebration in Mombasa, and I told my people out there, and we told ourselves, let's be together in prayer. And this is no mean achievement, because people prayed, we prayed, you prayed, all of us prayed, in whatever form, way you pray and we pray. And I can assure you, schools prayed, children prayed, and we had ways to monitor that, most of us. So while we had we must commend security in a very unique way, because for the first time, a place like Bomas would have turned very chaotic if only they did throw the tear gas. That would have messed it all up. But we were there. I was there, and others and others and others. And we were waiting like anybody else, innocently, not knowing what's going to happen. And you know what happened. We were there. And as it was happening, all of us from the church and the mosques and so on, we actually held hands to pray for this country. So our main basic involvement was not only to dialogue and look and watch, we also prayed. When all broke loose, and you know that whatever happened after that, we knew this country can go either way. And we know where we came from 2007. We said, no, we cannot wait. So we took on together in that same night to sit and reflect on what to do. Create teams of shuttle diplomacy, starting with the announcement, the announced winner, going to the outgoing, going to Right Honorable, physically meeting them person to person. I tell you, it wasn't easy. It wasn't easy because at that time everybody was numb, really numb. And I remember quite often we arrived and there's nobody talking to anyone. So we ensured and we tried our best, and we were able to be encouraged by those of you who send us messages. And we believe this country will always be better than it was before. So we were able to achieve an election which was seriously 50-50 almost. And you can see that very well. Of course, there are many who didn't vote, and we know we have a right, but at the same time, we have a right to exercise our rights. Those who didn't, we said, well, they have their own reasons. We don't blame anybody. It was a very difficult moment. So last but not least, I came to say once again to each one of you, congratulations for the role you played. We could have lit this country on fire, put it on fire by just utterances. And I remember in many churches where we prayed that week and that next week, it was kind of dullish, and everybody didn't want to hurt anyone. And we went and made sure our leaders who are competing on this matter, they were not left alone. We walked with them. I walked to Mzee Raila's place. I passed a prayer. We prayed the prayer of St. Francis, some of you remember. We prayed the prayer of asking the Holy Spirit to walk together. To His Excellency the President who was exiting. To His Excellency the President was coming in, and as we told him and said it very loud, let's be Kenyans, be inclusive. We said it in their faces. So it wasn't easy, and I must admit, leading such a team, we were later on felt the joy to know the country is together. Our question and our quest, even now as we speak, is Are we starting again to plant the seed of discord by revenge, by whatever? As we reflected this morning, and I left the team still on, we are warning ourselves and say, look, if we have come this far, come this far, surely whatever comes on our way, dialogue is the way. Not the revenge, not the one feeling I'm greater than the other. And two, our body that oversees election, IEBC, we need to think seriously on how to form one that can be able to handle this country for a longer period, as we have said it here. Congratulations for this board, for this symposium. Very important, the place of political parties. Very important, the place of all of us who are Kenyans to realize it's not just the politicians, the ordinary Wanjikus, as you say. And the country belongs to all of us. So, my dear brothers and sisters, and I must say that this is a very critical moment of our history. People applaud us far and wide for what we did and for the role we played, each one of us, judiciary, those who played the role, the executive, they held their horses. Could have been worse. So once again, congratulations. And all I can say is, you're a great country, we are a great country, let's not mess it up. Kwa hayo machache, asanteni sana na Mungu abariki kazi ya mikono yenu. Thank you, gentlemen. I really appreciate the invitation. And my name again is Archbishop Martin Kivuva. I'm the Archbishop of Mombasa and currently the chair of the Kenya Conference of Catholic Bishops of Kenya. And they give you your greetings. They say, tuko pamoja in all we want to do together. We can never work alone. If you go alone, you won't succeed. If we go alone as a church, we won't succeed. We need each other as all Kenyans love each other. Thank you. And once again, thank you for inviting us. God bless you. The prayer for food. We may ask you to stand. And since I may not be able to stay on afternoon, I like to invite you to pray the prayer of Kenya, which is our national anthem. Just one verse, and then I bless the food. Mungu nguvu yetu, ilete baraka kwetu, haki iwe ngao na mlinzi, na tukae na uhuru, amani na undugu, raha tupate na ustawi. Father, we want to thank you. You made us come from different parts of our country, different institutions, and more so the civil society, inviting us to reflect together where Kenya is and where we want to bring Kenya. We want to thank you, Lord, for the opportunity you give us, for the work charged with, everyone was charged with, of caring for this country, which is fragile. Peace is also fragile, but it comes from you. We want to commit ourselves to walking the path of justice while caring for all those vulnerable members of our society. We can never forget those who suffer hunger, while we pray for food to give us energy to love and serve them. Bless the work of our hands and walk our path. Those who are traveling, whichever way, they may arrive safely in their destinations. We make this prayer through Christ our Lord. May Almighty God bless us and bless the work of our food in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit. Good appetite. Thank you.
Joshua, the restaurant we went to up there is called what? Hello, can you?